Sometimes a certain smell will take me back to when I was young. How come I'm never able to identify where it's coming from? I'd make a candle out of it if I ever found it. Try to sell it, never sell out of it. I probably only sell one. Maybe to my brother, cause we have the same nose, same clothes, homegrown, a stone's throw from a creek we used to roam. But it would remind us of when nothing really mattered. Out of student loans and treehouse homes, we all would take the ladder. My name's Blurry Face and I care what you think. My name's Blurry Face and I care what you think. Wish we could turn back time to the good old days when the mama sang us to sleep, but now we're stressed out. Wish we could turn back time to the good old days when the mama sang us to sleep, but now we're
Good afternoon, everyone. As people are taking their seats, I'd like to welcome everyone to the 14th annual Joshua Aaron Rothstein Memorial Lecture. The annual lecture was established by Nancy and Steven Rothstein in memory of their son Josh, who was tragically killed during his sophomore year at Lake Forest Academy. By establishing the lecture, the Rothstein family honors Josh's memory, his kind deeds, his entrepreneurial accomplishments, and the depth of character that he demonstrated daily in his interactions with family, friends, and strangers. The Rothsteins also celebrate how Josh lived his life, guided by the ethics, dignified by sound character, dedicated to community service, and committed to living inclusively. Through the Joshua Rothstein Memorial Lecture, the family hope to inspire others to do the same. This year, I'm delighted to see a partnership between Lake Forest Academy's English departments and the Bird Colloquium and the Rothstein Lecture, and I want to thank the Rothstein family and Dr. Finnessy for making that happen. And with those words, I'd like to introduce Nancy Rothstein to the podium to say a few words and to introduce our speaker. Nancy.
Good afternoon, Lake Forest Academy community. It's a pleasure, as always, to be here. Josh Rothstein loved sports. When he realized he wasn't going to be a star athlete, he turned his attention to the business of sports. His ultimate goal was to own a pro sports team. Likely he would have. At 14 to 15, while he was here at Lake Forest, he had a thriving online business collecting and selling sports memorabilia, along with Beanie Babies, at the height of their popularity and value. This was 2000 to 2002. In fact, during his last cross-country meet here at LFA, the very week he died, I took a call for him while he was running to conclude a $5,000 transaction. And Josh had a proposal for a TV sports show, which we were pitching in the months before his young life was cut short. Why do I share this with you? Because no dream is too big. Because when nothing is certain, everything is possible. Because you have to believe in yourself and shoot for the stars. Because Josh is not here to share this with you, but we are here to share this with each other, as we have each year these past 14 years, honoring Josh and his values with speakers who reflect facets of Josh and provide inspiration for all of us. Josh Karp also loves sports, and he too had dreams as a teen growing up in Glencoe. After graduating from Milton Academy, he tried some things he wasn't great at, or so he writes, like marketing, advertising, and the family bakery supply business. He says he wasn't so great at law school either. Or maybe, just maybe, it wasn't that he wasn't good at these vocations. Maybe it was that he's a passionate person with big dreams, and none of this sparked his attention and his enthusiasm. And then came journalism school. He was hooked. He could write about all kinds of topics that interested him, and topics that he loved but wasn't good at, like golf. And he became a professor at Northwestern's renowned Medill School of Journalism, where he's taught for nearly a decade and has likely inspired many an aspiring journalist. Reading about Josh Karp, I couldn't help but think that maybe there might have been another career he would have embarked on. Comedian. Let's find out.
Thank you so much. I only wish my parents were here to hear your defense of the things I wasn't good at. They would be it was nice. Thank you. Well, thank you guys. I'm really flattered to be here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the courage to really find your voice as a writer, but I think it really applies to pretty much anything you want to do, whatever it is that you really, really care about. As Nancy mentioned, one of the things I've done, and this is kind of halfway through what I was going to talk about, but was I wrote a golf book. And one of the people I came in contact with was a guy named Steven Pressfield, who wrote the book, The Legend of Bagger Vance. And he is an expert not only on writing, and has written several books about it, but also on kind of what it takes to be an artist and what it takes to be somebody who really does the things they want to do. So I want to start with a quote from Steven. He said, "Most of us have two lives, the life we live and the unlived life within us. And between the two of those stands resistance." And as I look back at becoming a writer and doing what I do, it's not, and I think you guys will find as you get older, it is not a straight line. When I was your age, if somebody had told me I'd be a writer for a living, I would have been really excited, but I wouldn't have believed them for a second. But looking back, all of it makes some sense to me, and most of it was really about overcoming resistance. So the first thing I want to talk about are my parents. When I was about 10 or 11 years old, like probably most parents and like I've done with my kids, I asked my kids, I said, God, you can be anything you want to be when you grow up. What do you want to be? And I looked at them and I said, I want to be a sports writer. And they kind of like paused and looked at each other and then literally in unison said, you'll never make a living at it, so you really ought to go to law school. Which I actually did, which is kind of hard to believe, but I did. And I, in my parents' defense, you guys are all probably too young to remember this, but there was a TV show called The Odd Couple. And one of the characters was a sports writer. And he never got out of bed. He slept with his clothes on. He wore a baseball hat all the time, and all he did was cover baseball games and smoke cigars. That, I think, was their sense of what I thought being a sports writer was all about. So therefore, they probably thought law school was a better move for me. Now, my parents saw that I grew up in Glencoe, and they thought for me to really realize whatever potential they saw in me, that I should go away to boarding school. And I wound up at Milton Academy, which is outside of Boston, and is not exactly like Lake Forest Academy, but has definitely, some similarities. And as I look back, that was an incredibly formative experience that really helped me become what I've become as a writer in ways that I did not understand at the time. The most obvious thing is that I was exposed to reading things that I never would have read in a million years. I always liked to read, but I read things like Chaucer that would never have been a choice for me to read. And people who write have to read. That is it. Even if it's stuff you don't like, the more you read, the more it really feeds your brain and how you understand things you'll eventually do. Of equal importance was living in an all-boys dorm, which was an incredible education for me. I lived with 47 other boys, and I'm sure all of you who live in dorms know, you either learn how to get along with everybody or you don't. And getting along with everybody is far preferable. You learn how to talk to people, and you learn how to talk to people who are not like you, and you learn how to listen to people who are not like you. I also learned to observe people. I always kind of, I think in the back of my mind, looked at the dorm as being like a movie or some big sitcom or a novel, and everybody was a character. And in fact, I oftentimes think about how great it would be to write about the people who were there. And I was always observing it and always kind of mentally taking notes on what was going on. And then humor. I was exposed to the different senses of humor from people from different cultures and people from different parts of the country and different backgrounds. And that was really how we spent most of our free time, was either, kind of mostly trying to make each other laugh. And those are really good things for me as a person and ultimately in terms of becoming a writer. Now, I wish I could tell you that after high school, I went to USC Film School and studied screenwriting, or to Northwestern and studied journalism, or all the things I kind of, in my perfect world wished I'd actually done. But instead, I went to Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota, where I played on the golf team and played badly on the golf team. And when I graduated, I went into advertising. And I kind of thought, well, that's going to be a really great creative outlet for me. But I really, even though I had wanted to write, I was always really kind of fearful of writing, or of writing anything I liked or anything I wanted to write. I was a good writer technically as a high school student and as a college student, but I really couldn't express much of anything I wanted to express. So I went into advertising thinking I'd get a creative job. And I don't know what it was about me, but I must have looked okay in a suit or something, but they always pushed me to account services, which I was not real good at. So I did that for a couple of years, and then I went to law school, which was intellectually really stimulating, and which I think, looking back, really prepared me to understand difficult concepts, which is very helpful to me as a writer, because sometimes there are just things you have to think through logically and understand. And law school really trains your mind to be able to do that. But I graduated from law school and was looking for a job and got offered a couple of jobs that I did not want. And I was getting married at the time. And as I said to a group of students earlier today, the first time I really realized as an adult that I wanted to be a writer, my wife and I were going to pick up our wedding pictures. And we were driving somewhere on the south side, not far from where the White Sox play. And she said, well, do you really want to be a lawyer? And I said, no, I don't really want to be a lawyer, but I'm going to be a lawyer, because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. And she said, well, what would you do if you could do anything? And I was like, it was really hard for me to overcome the resistance, even with my wife, of saying what I wanted to be. And I was like, well, if I could live my life over again, I would have been a sports writer. And she said, well, why don't you do that? Now, I wish I could tell you this is the moment that I just went, okay, I'm throwing everything away, and I'm going to go become a sports writer. Instead, this was the moment where I slammed on the brakes, pulled into a parking lot, and started screaming about how there was no way I could ever be a sports writer. I think, looking back, I guess it obviously touched something inside of me and made me feel like I had missed something, and that I had foreclosed that opportunity. So I wound up going to work for my family's bakery supply business, which, again, I think was a good experience. I think looking back, again, it was something that I think of in terms of humor. There were so many things that happened there that I, made mental notes of that would, hopefully find their way into some story someday. But I did it, and I worked for my dad, and that was an interesting experience, but I was not good at it. Fortune really smiled upon me, because if things had not gone a certain way, I'd probably be still working there and possibly running a business with a lot of people whose livelihoods depended on me running a business that really wasn't what I wanted to be doing. But about 2 years after I joined the business, my dad had an offer to buy the business, and he sold it, and all of a sudden, I was faced with this weird situation. I was about 30 or 31, and I was free to do kind of whatever I wanted with my life. And there was not any big, clear path. And I had a little bit of money, and I had one kid at the time, and I had a mortgage, but not a big one. And I thought, I can afford for 1 year to go to grad school and see if I can try to be a writer. And I applied to Northwestern Journalism School, the graduate program, and I got in. I went in with the intention of doing something very, very safe. My goal was to become a newspaper writer. And I really thought, okay, I'll go through there, I'll get the credentials, I'll get some kind of internship, and I'll wind up with the Tribune or the Sun-Times. And while I was there, I was taking all these newspaper classes, and one of the really big lessons I learned, by the way, and I think this is important for anybody to know going through their lives, things that seem so awful at the time are some of the best experiences you'll ever have. I covered the criminal courts at 26th in California while I was a student. Has anybody here ever had the pleasure of being down at 26th in California? Okay, not a happy place, right? Nor a friendly place. And it was a really tough place to find your way around. And I remember I walked into the reporter's room the first day, and this is like after you couldn't smoke in public places, but everybody was smoking, and they're all like, crabby old reporters. And I walked in, and they just immediately told me what I should not look at and not to touch their stuff. Everybody was like, stay out of here, don't do that. Nobody was helping anybody. And I found my way around. I learned to get along with those guys. And then one day, I was in a courtroom, and the court went to recess, and the judge walked out, and I ran into the well, walked into the well of the court to try to find out if the court reporter had an accurate record of, a certain thing I wanted to find out. And I don't know what part of the judge was not out of the courtroom, and I don't know what was her problem that day, but she turned around, and she came back in, and this was a full courtroom, and just started screaming at me, like right in my face, and for a long time. And I remember standing there thinking, like, I don't ever want to do this again. I don't want to do this job. This is awful. I don't know how I'm going to make it through this. And then it ended, and I walked out in the hallway, and I was like, okay, still here, like that. And I'm like, I got through that. And the next day, I had to go talk to another judge, and wound up going into his chambers and asking him for something that I thought I would never have access to, and getting it. So really, and there are a million times in my life and my career where I look at things that if somebody had told me they would happen, I would have thought, oh my God, this is going to be devastating, and this is going to be horrible. And they really turned out to be good things, because you get through things and you can handle it. While I was at Northwestern, I started taking some magazine classes and found that actually I really liked writing longer, more creative stories than just doing news reporting. That said, I was still looking for like a real job. But when I got out, I had all kinds of freelance opportunities. Now, again, this is something that was not part of my plan. Never in a million years did I think I would be writing freelance articles. I thought I needed a real stable job and health insurance and all those things. But I became one. And for the first 5 years, I worked incredibly hard. I was writing 5 or 6 or 7 stories a week. And I learned a couple of lessons. One, I'd always stifled my ideas. I'd never thought that things that I was necessarily interested in were worthy of anybody reading about. And when you're a writer, and you work for magazines, that's the biggest thing they want from you, is they want to know what you want to write about and if you have good ideas. So I learned that ideas were my currency and that everything kind of around me was worth writing about, or anything that I was interested in. I learned to deal with rejection. And again, this is another one of those things. A lot of writers, I know a lot of really good writers who want to write a book, who want to write for a certain magazine, who want to write a certain article, or want to write a TV show. And the thing that holds them back is fear. There are people who have great books in their minds who never write them because they're scared of being rejected. And for whatever reason, I'm not the boldest person in the world, but I learned to not fear rejection. I learned to kind of accept it. And again, it was like being yelled at in the courtroom. It just isn't so bad. And now with email, it's really easy because people just don't get back to you, and that's about the easiest form of rejection you could have. Now, I also had some experiences that were in which I came up with an idea and then was forced to do something I did not necessarily want to do. I pitched some stories to Chicago Magazine one time, and they kept saying no, 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 and I'd never written for them before. And finally, I said, what do you guys want? What can I do? They said, well, we have this annual singles issue. And I was like, oh, my God. And they said, and if you can find some really interesting, cool single people to write about, we'll do this. Now, this is not what I had intended to do with my career, nor did I want to dig up, cool single people for Chicago Magazine. But my next door neighbor at the time was a doctor in the emergency room at Cook County, and ER was a big show at the time. And I asked her if there were any really good-looking people who were single who worked in the emergency room, which I could not believe this was what I was doing with my life. And she said, oh, there's a guy, he's so good-looking, nobody can even talk to him. She's like, he's incredible. And so I said, could you ever put me in touch with him? So I get a call. He must have thought he thought I was a doctor, and he said, Dr. Karp. And I was like, I'm not a doctor. And I literally had to say to another man, I'm writing for the hot singles issue of Chicago Magazine, and I'm interested in profiling you. And what was great was, for him, he was kind of like, well, yeah, of course. Like most people, that would be weird. He was exactly the perfect person for it. He's like, yeah, sure, I've been waiting for this. What's taking you so long? And so I did that, and I found some others. But that was, another thing where, I was like, God, if somebody had told me I was going to have to do that, I would have been like, oh, no, please don't make me do that. But it was a fun experience. I met interesting people. And I got over something that I did not want to do. Now, up to this point, about 3 years into my career, I had really written pretty standard stuff. It wasn't news stuff necessarily, but it was just really writing really straightforward magazine stories. And it always feels weird to say it, but I really, and this is, I guess, something that takes some form of courage. I kind of found my voice writing a story about a local author named Bill Zemi. And I had spent a lot of time with him. He was a big magazine writer. He was a big author. And I was sitting in my office trying to come up with a lead for the story, trying to come up with how to get into the story. And I kept coming up with things, and they felt so boring to me. And finally, just a phrase came into my head, and it was not, and it scared me to death. And it won't seem exciting to you. He seemed kind of lost in his life at the time because he had just finished up a big project. So I started out, and I was just like, the phrase "Bill Zemi is at a loss" came into my head. And then the story just started coming out. And it wasn't like anything I'd ever written before. And when I submitted that story, it was the longest story I'd ever written at the time. And I just wrote it as it came out. I edited it, I worked on it, but I really wrote everything not as looking at my notes and doing this and that, but really letting it emerge the way it was coming into my head. And writing, this was when I kind of learned that really good writing is a subconscious experience as much as it's a conscious experience. It's stuff that just comes out of your brain. And because of that, I handed this paper, this story in, and I was absolutely petrified. I knew like, either they are going to say this is like one of the best things we've ever had, or this is absolutely horrible. How could you possibly submit this to us? And they liked it, and all of a sudden it really changed both how I wrote and who I got to write for. People at different magazines around the country noticed it. It got a lot of press for various reasons. And all of a sudden I had opportunities to do other things. And more interesting stuff, and I started writing for Playboy, and I did a couple small things for Esquire, and I wrote for The Atlantic and Salon and a bunch of places. So that was really, a real eye-opener for me in terms of like, I listened to something that was so counterintuitive. And the point being, I think that, my parents were really well-intended, and they did a lot of great things for me. And they did what parents should do. Like when my kids tell me they want to play in the NHL, I don't sit there and, go like, that's awesome, well, let's just forget about everything else, you will play in the NHL. You want your kids to have a practical plan. But I really realized, how much it was about overcoming the resistance that was built into me and built into society. Because everybody will tell you, when you really care about, writing or art or something like that, like, you'll never make a living. And so I had kind of gotten over that. That was a bit of resistance. I then pitched a book idea about a guy named Doug Kenny, who was the founder of National Lampoon magazine and wrote Animal House and wrote Caddyshack, and then died really mysteriously shortly after it came out. And again, I think the real lesson I learned, first of all, was it was just one day. I was like, this is an idea. There was an opportunity to pitch it to an agent, and I just did it. And I didn't let my thought that like, oh my God, it's a book, hold me back. I didn't wonder whether I could write a book. I just put myself out over my skis and took the chance of doing that. And then it wound up, being bought by a publisher, and then I actually had to do it, which is a whole other thing when you're a writer. But it was a great experience. And again, it was one of those things where I had to overcome the fear of what I could be, of all the, being safe, being conservative, not doing what I wanted. Now, the other thing I learned was it got the first 12 reviews. It got a strangely large amount of press attention for a first book. And I was very surprised and really happy about it. And my first 12 reviews were all good. And I had heard friends of mine talk about getting bad reviews, and I thought well, of course, you feel bad you're getting bad reviews, but how bad is that? And then I found out I was going to be reviewed in the New York Times. And I was like, oh, well, of course, this is going to be another one of these, it's just going to be another great review. And I was in Boston playing golf with a couple of high school friends, and we were staying at a hotel, and somebody said, oh, it's going to be in the Sunday Times, and it's midnight on Saturday. Let's go see if it's online already. And we looked at it, and I read it, and it was just every nightmare you could have of what, it was just, she hated me, she hated the idea that it was done, she hated the subject, and it was almost comical looking back and how much the woman despised the whole thing. And I learned two lessons. First of all, my friends, thankfully I was with them, and they just gave me a hard time about it so that I couldn't even feel bad. They just made fun of me. They read it to me 15 times in a row and kind of just, made it into a joke. The other thing was people started calling me and congratulating me, because when something like that happens, to you it seems like the worst thing in the world. To everybody else, they go, oh my God, you were in the New York Times. And again, it was one of those things where, if somebody had said that, I would have been I would have curled up into a ball and just hid over the idea that I would get a bad review in the New York Times, which my mother is still extremely upset about and remembers the name of the critic 10 years later. But for me, that was a great experience. Having something like that happen, having that, that's, you kind of go wow, I'm still here. I'm still the same person. Then I had the opportunity to write a golf book. And I don't know how many of you guys are golfers or how many of you have read golf books, but there's a whole genre of golf literature about kind of Eastern spirituality in golf. It's like some of the best-selling golf books ever are like Zen Golf, and there's the book Bagger Vance is actually the story of the Bhagavad Gita just told on a golf course. It like literally scene for scene. And the 3 of the 4 best-selling golf books are based in this Eastern spiritual stuff. And I thought, I wonder if people teach lessons based on this method. And I started Googling it, and there are people who teach lessons based in Tai Chi and people who teach lessons based in every possible Eastern spirituality you could imagine. And I thought, you know, it'd be really fun to go around and take these lessons and see if I could either achieve inner peace through golf or better golf through inner peace. And it was really, I mean, it was very exciting to be able to do something that involved sports, which was, you know, as I said, that was originally what I really had wanted to be doing. But I also learned a huge amount of stuff about myself and about being a writer as well that I did not expect to find. The biggest lesson I learned in golf was, and it's true, is the counterintuitive lesson that the less you care about your score, the better your score generally winds up being. And that's a very difficult trick to do in your own mind. But I would play golf and I wouldn't keep score, and I'd do it and do it and do it. And finally, I just stopped caring. And then the less I cared, the better I did. The more I kind of relaxed and was able to actually enjoy playing golf. I forgot that was the purpose of playing golf too. You know, I thought it was get the best score, get the best score. And then I realized it was about enjoying the experience. And that really translated into my writing. And when I wrote the book, I was able to find a new voice. I'd never written about myself before, despite the fact that I'm sitting up here telling you all about myself right now. I'm not somebody who is really into talking or writing about myself that much. And I was able to write in a completely different way, in a much more creative way, and in a way that was much more uniquely like how I would talk in conversation. And that, again, was a really unexpected moment where I was able to find this new dimension of what I do. After that, you know, and I guess what I learned to trust myself within that process, okay? And I also learned to really just, you know, trust my voice and trust what it felt like I should be writing. So I know I'm running a little bit out of time here, so since then I've written another book, and I have written a TV pilot, which was another example of just doing something and winding up, just by virtue of doing it, being able to make it happen. But I want to leave you guys with just a couple of things that I think are takeaways that I wish, I guess, somebody had told me in high school. First thing is, you know, if there's a voice in your head telling you that you really want to do something, at the very least, really try it. If it's something you really care about, do it. Don't do necessarily what's expected of you. You can always do that later. But really throw yourself into the things you really care about, because the older you get, the less opportunities you have to do those things. And those are the things, no matter how much people tell you you'll never do well at, those are the things at least in my experience, that you succeed at, are the things you care about. Learn from failure. You will fail. You may fail on an extremely grand scale. I could go back and tell you about every single time I've failed and felt like it was the end of the world. And then you survive, and it becomes a good story, if nothing else, if you're a writer. Hard work is obviously very important, especially when you're a writer and artist. Literally showing up and doing it and treating it like a job and having the faith in yourself to act like you belong doing this and treating it like a job makes a huge difference between you and a lot of the other people who do this for a living, or trying to. And let's see what else. And then I guess, really, I think, keep going. Don't let things stop you. It's really easy to just get frustrated with whatever it is that you love and stop doing it. And the less you do it, the less chance there is you are going to do it. So if you keep moving forward, and if you keep taking risks, and if you keep following the things that interest you, even if they change 100 times, that, I think, is really the most important thing that I've learned from what I do for a living and learned from my experiences as a writer. So with that, thank you guys for listening to that. And anybody have any questions? And I cannot see anybody. Yes, sir. Could you stand up? Sorry. I think, so, I'm sorry, I was told to ask you guys to stand up so people could hear. Yeah. I'm sorry, could you say it a little louder? How did I turn my life into? You know, in terms of just like story ideas, you mean, or in terms of literally when I'm writing something? Yeah, you know, it's really hard. I mean, in fact, I'm writing something right now. You kind of have to reinvent it every time you do it. I think, at least for me, the instinct is always to be like, oh, I've got to do it, you know, in this really, really conscious way. And then at a certain point in a project, you just kind of, it's about relaxing. And you just kind of relax and accept like, okay, I just need to do this in the simplest way possible. It's very easy, I think, in any endeavor, but particularly in writing, to make what you're doing really complicated and to try to be doing something extraordinary. And once you kind of just hit the wall and give that up is when you start having the subconscious experience or the idea comes into your head of how the story should start. And so I wish it was something that was just easy to magically do, you know, every time, but every time it goes through the same process. It's a lot of frustration, and then all of a sudden you get to the point where you relax and stop, and it's kind of like the golf thing, you stop caring about the score, and that is when the idea starts to come. I can't see. Yes. Oh, you guys kicked our butts at everything. McAllister was especially bad at everything. Oh, the television pilot? Yeah, so I was working on one of my books. One of the things that tends to happen when you're writing a book, at least for me, is you get halfway through writing it and you think, oh my God, I'm never going to finish this. And so you look for a distraction. And so I read a nonfiction book in the middle of while working on my most recent book, about a bunch of guys who were sports writers, who were some of the original sports writers at Sports Illustrated. But they all started out in this really like lousy, third-rate afternoon newsroom in Fort Worth, Texas in the late 50s and early 60s. And as I read it, I just thought, God, this would make a great TV show or movie. And instead of waiting and thinking, I kind of just immediately contacted the author and said, has anybody inquired about the rights to this? And after a while, I was able to acquire the rights. And so the story is really, and it's changed because it always seems simple when you read something and you go, that's a perfect movie. Then you have to do it and everything, you have to really turn it into a TV show. And so it's really basically about these guys who are all kind of very wild, hard-drinking, hard-living sports writers against the backdrop of Texas in the years leading up to the Kennedy assassination, where there's this huge rise of the ultra-right wing that kind of culminates in the Kennedy assassination. So it's kind of the humor of these guys set against the darkness of the backdrop. So, and it's been really fun. I really enjoy, TV writing is the thing I've enjoyed most of anything I've done.
My other question was about the doctor you wrote the profile for, Chicago Magazine.
Uh-huh.
How did you do with it?
How did he do with it? Well, I'll tell you this. So as part of that, and I had to go to the singles party. They had like a big event, and could not have felt weirder. Particularly I think at the time we'd already had our 4th kid, so I'm like, this married guy with 4 kids, with all these people who are like either in the hot singles issue or looking to meet people from it, and I will tell you, he was the absolute center of that entire experience. I mean, he was like, I don't know who it is that's born like that, but he was just like, he was it. So yeah, I'm sure he did extremely well based on it. One more question. I still can't see. Anybody? Oh, yes.
Do you have a dream project, the one that's going to take a lot of courage to say, this keeps coming back into my mind, but I haven't done it yet?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple. I mean, I have, files of ideas about things that I've worked on, or that I would like to write about. I think someday I would love to either honestly write about my experience in boarding school as a TV show, or about working in the bakery supply industry. There was, I don't know if you guys are aware, recently there was a thing called Punchki Day, which is like a big thing that they started promoting that's like a Mardi Gras donut that filled jelly donut. Well, one of the things my dad did when I started working there, and he had a good sense of humor, was he was on the National Punchki Advisory Board. And after I'd been there about 6 months, he was like, you can take my place on that, because I think he just saw that as time ticking off his life. He's like, that is, and he thought everybody involved with it was crazy. And it was kind of like the meeting of the 5 families in The Godfather. It was like all the people from all the companies sitting around this table listening to this man who had dedicated his life. All he did was promote Punchkis all year round. Kind of go on about what the efforts for Punchki Day were going to be. And that whole business was like that all the time. I mean, it was some of the craziest people I ever met. So I guess, writing about things that I've experienced, but, fictionalizing them, I think, I would love to do that someday. Right now, I really just hope, my TV pilot got bought by a producer, and I'm really just hoping that can sell to a network and move on with that. But yeah, I would love to do something like that. So thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
So again, I'd like to thank Nancy Rothstein and the family for
Yes,
being
thank you so
here
much.
and for making this happen, for Dr. Finnessy, and a gift from the Academy.
All
It's
right.
not raining out there, it's windy, but an
If you-
umbrella,
if you knew
an
how much
LFA
I-
umbrella is very
If you knew
helpful.
how much I need this, you would be shocked.
Okay. Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
sir.
Thank you, Josh.
Appreciate it.
Thanks. With that, all school meeting dismissed.
I'm so alone, nothing